Every fall, Seattle Public Schools goes through staffing adjustments in response to fall enrollment. So now's a good time to remind our staff, our families, and our community about why that happens. I have here with me today Chief Financial Officer Jolynn Berge. Why do we do fall staffing adjustments? What's the purpose?
Well, we have 104 schools in Seattle, so while we make projections about enrollment, that happens early on the year before we actually start that school year. So we always have things that are changing, and we always are slightly over and under for various schools. So we want to true that number up and make sure that we have the right amount of staffing spread across our district.
What happens at the district and school level during this process? Is this normal?
It is normal. All districts go through an adjustment in the fall where they're looking at actual by school numbers versus the overall number that we thought we were going to have for the district. So how that ends up rolling out to each individual school can vary. We start that projection using a lot of data from the city and the county and the state, all of our birth numbers, things like that. We roll those out in about January to our schools. And then we have initial staffing that we roll out at the end of February. Based on those estimates, we'll do some adjustments in June based on updated data that we get. And then we actually wait for kids to show up in the fall. Because a lot of things change for families over the summer where they may have their student enrolled, but they don't actually come to school, or they make a different decision, or new people move in who haven't enrolled.
So really, we're just waiting to see who shows up in the fall.
We're waiting to see who shows up in the fall.
And how are schools staffed? Who makes those decisions?
So we have a central formula that we work on with our partners. So not just central office staff, but our school leaders are on that, as well as our teacher union sits on that committee. We work on the staffing formula together. And then we have a division of enrollment planning that does the actual projections. They give the numbers to budget, and we roll that out in the formula.
Okay, so this district's really been engaged in looking at racial equity. We have a new strategic plan, Seattle Excellence, that is steeped in racial equity, making sure we're focusing on students of color furthest from educational justice. Is racial equity thought about as you are doing this budgeting and staffing process?
It is. There's different components of the formula that are adjusted based on factors like poverty. So schools that have higher poverty have more staff. They're given more teachers. They're funded for a smaller class size. And remember that the staffing is given as an allocation. And as long as they're meeting our contractual requirements, schools really have choice. The principal has choice when working with his staff as to how to actually roll that out into the classrooms. Kids don't come in neat packages, so sometimes there's overs and unders, which families may experience when they walk in and say, oh, I thought I was supposed to have a class size of 18. Why are there 22 kids? Maybe because you had 22 kindergartners who showed up that year, but maybe there's only 17 first graders. So there's some fluctuations that happen there.
Yeah, and those are all school by school decisions.
All school by school decisions that happen.
There's a lot of talk about, some of the disruption that happens in this sort of a normal process of adjusting staff in the fall. And I know you have visited with principals, and is it easier to add staff or to take away staff in the fall?
Yeah, one of the things that we've really heard back in the last 3 years from our school leaders and from our staff is that it's easier to add staff. I mean, any change is disruptive, but the change in taking staff away is really more disruptive. So one of the things that we do is that we do budget a pot of money to really let schools keep staff, even if they don't have the enrollment that would drive that number of staff, that they're mitigated staffing and they get to keep that staffing. And if it comes down to how many schools can we afford to mitigate or where do we need to add staff, that's where that racial equity lens comes into play once again, in that we decide, who's serving the most students of color, who are serving the most students in poverty, students who are experiencing homelessness. All of those factors together are factored into what schools need to have the least amount of disruption and should keep staff even if their enrollment's low, or if their enrollment's higher and they need staff. That's how we use that prioritization.
And sometimes that can mean high schools and middle schools may have to adjust their schedule based on the staffing that they're allocated and then added or decreased in the fall?
Yeah, secondaries are really driven by master schedules. So those master schedules really are determined at the building level. The principal really determines what classes are going to be offered. So we'll give them the staffing, they decide what classes, how many 7th grade classes, how many English classes, so on and so forth, what that looks like at the individual school level. So it's a little bit more difficult at the secondary level to adjust those master schedules, but and again, what we've heard is it's always easier to add, whether you add in second semester or you can add, maybe you have a teacher who's a part-time teacher. Maybe they'll teach another class for you. So that buy up or adding is much easier than the taking away.
I guess the main gist is basically this is a normal process that happens in districts across the state and the country, and because it's not an exact science of the predicting of the enrollment, this is just a natural part of our business.
It is, and it seems bigger in Seattle because we have 104 schools, and the district that's closest to us probably has 50 schools.
Right.
So everything has a bigger magnitude of impact, or so it seems, because of the sheer number of students that we're educating, 53,000 kids, where those kids all land in individual schools. We have a lot of choice in Seattle that happens as well. So getting that all right on the dot is something that we strive for, but there's always adjustments that have to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Jolynn, for all of your work and for Seattle Public Schools and making sure that our students are receiving a high quality education across the district.
Thank you.